Chapter 4 Digital Rights. The journey to Georgia is a long one, and after some thought of what the older man Charlie said, Red began to express his thoughts. Andy was munching on some cookies and staring out the window. His focus turned to Red as he spoke. I think there is a good argument on both sides. While academic poetry is much more structured, I find that many poets get lost in the use of language, to the extent they hide the expression of the poem so deep within the symbolic word that many never really see the meaning at all. Personally, I love this type of writing because I love the challenge of the riddle, but for the average reader, I think much gets lost in translation. If the reader has to spend all his/her time trying to understand the language used, then at what point do they have time to really feel the emotion of the poem? Don't get me wrong, I love nothing more than just to sit down with a good poem and just read over and over until the message becomes clear in my mind. But really, how many people take the time? And if the message of the poem is lost in the riddle, then what is the point? Also, many poets trying to write poetry use the language of poetry in rhyme and meter, but lose the very essence of what makes a good poem. Street poets, on the other hand, use much free verse, and language tends to be more commonplace and easier to understand. While academic poetry is built in riddles and hidden in symbolism, street poets tend to be more very blunt, and the message is much easier to see. This type of poetry also tends to be filled with raw emotion and feeling. I personally think a good modern-day poet finds himself or/slash herself somewhere in the middle. The true power of poetry is the ability of a poem to become more than just words on a page, but to transcend the written word and to create something much more meaningful. True poetry is the wisdom to one's heart and soul. It allows others to see through your eyes, to feel the emotion as you felt it, to walk for a moment in time in another's shoes. It gives the reader the opportunity to gain perspective on the world and those around them, and to self-reflect that perspective on themselves. It allows for a looking-glass reflection. As one gains perspective, it allows one to truly grow. This is my opinion, is the true power of poetry. Whether it be a street poet or an academic one, if the poem allows the reader an avenue to such a realization that the poem has done its job well, expressed Red. I agree, said Andy, as he voiced his opinion. Some of the work of Shakespeare contained merely language of the time. That's just an example. Even though he was educated, it can be said by many poets of previous centuries. I believe that the best poets out there, those who manage to be original yet fluent, can be a combination of two. Writing about life experiences, however, using complex lexicons and ambiguity to create an original set of poetry. But I hate to categorize anything, to tell you the truth. I think the mark of good poetry or lyrics is how much imagery, thought, and feeling it provokes with minimal words. I guess my catalog speaks for itself. Although I have been more than inspired by Jim Morrison and Bob Dylan, I guess I am more of an academic. I seem to respond better to the more academic poems. But then again, Hank Williams touched more souls than T.S. Eliot. When I think street, I think forced rhymes and commercial shallowness. Red looked at Andy, and Red said, a lot of poets find freedom in structure, and it's a natural proclivity to be conforming the content to a framework based on knowledge of grammatical structure. They try to keep a balance between presenting a puzzle to be discovered and being divisively vague or masked, as if something or of an inside joke. Poets must, as a reader, to be able to understand or have some kind of simpatico with some basic gut level presentations that require an empathic, yes, I know what you mean, response. The important benchmark of creative operation is to write to please yourself first. If it comes out on its own without an agenda attached, it's merely like to be received as valid in critique regardless what label anyone chooses to stick on it. But most of all, I go for the untraditional poets. They are the poets that extend themselves beyond the establishment fact toward a new concept of presentation for a new generation. They are willing to glean information from the traditional, anti-traditional, and anything else out there that uses language to communicate feelings, concepts, and sensual information. Melody and figurative language through versification. They wish to form on a new, untraditional attitude that isn't afraid of the old or the new. And he replied, as far as street poetry, that's all I've done. I admire the fast melodic beat, the undulating delivery of the voice, the often dramatic theatrical delivery, and all is spoken is memorized, not read off of paper like I read. I respect those street poets because they have it all over me as far as guts and ego. I'm not sure there's a difference. The poets that we look upon now might be as well have been the street poets of their day. It was a different world back then. On the other hand, the street poets of today may well have expanded the knowledge and training they got by studying the academic poets. They are all different parts of the same animal. Just an actor can be dramatic, a bit player, or comedian. So can poets be any style they choose? They are all poets. Andy leaned in close to Red and whispered, I find the question to be simply bullshit. Street poets, academic poets? People cannot be divided into camps as warring factions pitted against each other. Now there's good poetry and, well, the not so good. I find the question demeaning to all poets, regardless. Then Andy whispers, and they become louder. And another thing, all poets, indeed, all writers draw the material from experiences and observation. If one has a bit of formal education in the area of poetry, then it's simply part of his experience. So what? If one has no formal education in the area of poetry, so what? It does not matter, any way or the other. Now there are good poets and bad poets, but even that is subjective. Red looked at Charlie to see if he heard Andy, and Charlie was looking out the window with an earpiece that was attached to his iPad. And Red said, there are three things to consider here, Andy. How good is a poem written in command of English? This is basic. You either write well or you don't. Obviously, the better your command of written English, the better you will write, and then the more you can do. Secondly, it behooves poets to allow the reader to make that determination. And if they wish to break the rules, they should first know what the applicable rules are. A final point, if poets seek to craft effective and compelling poetry, they must endeavor to write on a higher level. And in order to do that, first they must learn to think on a higher level. And he was pumped up. He said to Red, there are myriad definitions of what poetry is, and also what it's supposed to be. It might be worthwhile to collect definitions and perspectives on the mythology and the theory of poetry and the poetic process. We can then compare definitions and perspectives to the great wordsmiths of the day gone by. My personal favorite is Poetry is Blood and Intellect Running Together by W.B. Yeats. Red, listen to me. Writing poetry is a gift that not everyone has, said Andy. Can you say that all novelists can write poetry, or all poets can write a novel? No, they can't. Poetry is a gift, no matter where you feel it inside you. Mostly poets feel it in their hearts. Those taking academic writing classes to be a better poet, if they did not already have the gift for writing them in their heart. The important thing in poetry is the emotion poets are able to put into a poem. When a poet can transfer the passion from their body in their poem, people will know it. When they fake it, people will know that too, said Red. Well said, Red, Andy replied. Poetry is reaction to the environmental shocks that transform into feelings and thoughts. Anything that tries to block the flow of feelings and thoughts cannot be appreciated. Charlie looked at them and said, discussing the infrastructure of poetry, every poet is amazing. The poets of the 21st century need to make the youth their priority. They are the heart of the poetry. The title is meaningless without this. There's only one way, and that is the right way. This should be heard, along with being seen. Here's another thought. Poetry can only be rated by the reader. There's something I want to add before we talk about the poetic audience, and more on you, said Red. There are poets that know the language of poets worldwide, no matter where the poets are from. or what they have done, regardless of time, place, country, race, nation, or if they are people that are totally isolated from the greater part of the planet. For all people have poetry. The heightened use of music in their language, which offers the untraditional poet more tools to play with within their personal pursuit of presentation. They are the poets that are willing to extend and stretch the poetic outlook in the presentation of language to form a new concept about information within the craft. They want to widen and expand the pathways toward the written song to reach its fullest capacity. They are the poets that wish to extend what can be done with language musically, metaphorically, creatively, through the presentation of versified form without limit. They seek the highest form of creativity to express their muse, not by being exclusive, but by being inclusive. They are the untraditional poets. They are the poets that know readers are a vital part of presentation of poetry. They will extend these concepts. They have the wish to communicate to readers. Therefore, they write untraditionally into the timeless thought of presentation. The night grew on them. They all became tired, so they retired to their roomettes. While they were falling asleep, Red and Annie were thinking about Charlie, and Charlie was thinking about what was following them.